Hello.
It is still morning, isn't it?
It is. All right, we were on planner.
And so I'll start off. I think we ended as I was getting worn down after a long session, and I take your administrative advice to heart, Sarah. I don't quite know how to say it, but I do believe they are approaching really desperately needing that help. But I do understand the need to look a little more into it. But mostly the situation we're in of needing to be not expanding, but staying status quo for the time being. And so I will relent on that, but I do appreciate Michelle's advocacy for that department.
And I do as well.
Okay, moving on.
Thanks, Michelle.
Compromise, remember?
Right, it's a good thing.
So the next item was market and merit. As we stated in the beginning of these conversations, these market numbers were developed pre-COVID, and that would reflect the 1.1 million would reflect a full year cost of all of that pay. My recommendation here would be for the commission to allow us to wait until basically mid-year next year and have a conversation about where we are in terms of our financial situation and our economy and what we're seeing for the 2022 budget, and make some recommendations that we could take into account as we set the 2022 budget.
So my back of the napkin math here on my recommendation works like this. So I just added up all those things that we thought we might budget for that would be CARES Act funded, and then took a third of this number and subtracted all of that CARES Act stuff by a third of this number and just said, I want to set that aside. I don't know that that's a good way to do it. I was just trying to find a way to say, look, if we get some CARES Act money and we have some non-appropriated balances, could we help out our Douglas County staff a little bit? And so that's the only way that's how I got to that. I don't know if that's a smart way of doing it. I don't know how to make that work, Sarah and Cammie, but that was just sort of, I was trying to figure out a way. And it may be better, Sarah, the way that you described it is, let's see how, let's put this aside, that we save this for the items that we've sort of identified here. And then if we have CARES Act money that comes in and saves the day on some of that, we can then look at this again in the future. Is that what you're recommending?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, because when I take 1.1 million and divide it into thirds, I get $392,972.
Yeah, we may have added some stuff now that I didn't have on my initial list.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So I would say along that line of thinking, as long as we all recognize that it's the desire of this commission to revisit this when we're a little clearer on CARES Act dollars and where the economy sits, it may very well be that we can do better than that kind of third of the figure calculation. So I trust Sarah when she says we'll bring this back, or someone will, whatever the commission is, will bring this back for consideration when we know a little more. So I'm comfortable with leaving it off of the budget, knowing that we count that as a high priority when things are a little clearer.
Cami, can you make sure we have that in our notes, just that we will, before we really set the budget for 2022, that we will revisit this?
Yep.
Because, yeah, that would be my hope, was that, let's say that we are in a strong financial position as we go into the end of the first quarter next year, and revenues are meeting expectations, that we're rebounding. I would want to use some one-time money to pay for 2021 that we have available here, and then be able to build in that increased amount into the mill levy moving forward. So the timing is key on it, to make sure that we don't get off schedule from 2022.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, to put it in some perspective, although that's maybe disappointing to not add that in right now, I think we can remember that Sarah and Cami and Jill and everyone worked hard just to create a budget where no one's being terminated, no one's being laid off, no one's being furloughed. So that's an accomplishment right there. And hopefully we can do better when we know a little more. So.
Okay. So if we have consensus on that, Cami, I think, has given us an updated sheet, correct?
I have not emailed anybody the updated sheet. I walked one into you yesterday after the meeting.
That's right. That's why I have it.
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah.
Sarah, one question on the portable radios. It shows a mill levy impact on those. Don't we want to do that with one-time dollars?
Well, we can talk through that. I mean, in the past, we did it to sort of offset the transfer. I mean, because they had a higher transfer last year because they had a number of CIP items. Give me what we've in there.
So the way it's set up right now, and you guys can direct me which way you would like it done. The way it's set up right now is that the 231 for the portable radios is actually coming out of the general fund and being transferred into the ambulance fund as part of their transfer, which originally was listed as 1.2 million in your books. And now it's down to like 239 or 2 something. So this will make the transfer more similar to last year's. And so it does look like a mill levy impact, but it's not an increase by any means. If you wanted to do it through one-time funds, it would actually add back to the non-appropriated amount.
Say that last part one more time.
If you wanted to do it one time from CIP dollars, like you had told them that was an option before we knew that the transfer amount was going to go down so low, then this $231,000 would add back to that non-appropriated amount that's currently got 473,000 leaving it.
Oh, I see.
If you leave the 231 the way this spreadsheet has it, it does appear that it has a mill levy impact because it is coming from the general fund, but it's actually less of a mill levy impact than last year. Yeah, the transfer to ambulance was last year.
Yeah. So if But when you said at the beginning, your first comment, if the commissioners decided not to take that, transfer in essence from CIP as opposed to the transfer, it'd be increasing our non-appropriated amount.
It would increase your non-appropriated, so it would decrease the amount we're taking out of there.
Which we could do. I mean, it's really one half dozen or another. I mean, this has been the hard part about, this is really just our second year with this ambulance transfer from general into the ambulance fund, to sort of off the fact that we have a 3 mil cap on the ambulance fund. And so, it is something that we can accommodate. What I would say, Commissioner, the only disadvantage of taking it out of one-time funds is that, like, we will have ongoing commitments to capital out of ambulance. And, if we drop this transfer down too low, it might hurt us. Cammie, am I stretching here to say hurt us in a future year if they come back with another CIP that increases it? And I know I'm getting pretty obtuse here when I come into like where we take it from in the budget, but Cammie's absolutely right. It's not increasing the mill levy at all. It's taking the mill levy that we were sending to non-appropriated and putting it to ambulance. That's all.
That's fine. I had it stuck in my mind, but that there was one-time CIP money.
And there is.
But this is, as long as you all are comfortable with it, it sounds like it makes sense to do it this way. So I'm fine.
I think when the ambulance transfer was originally $1.2 million with those 10 additional positions added into it that the city hadn't figured up their numbers, it was really scary for us to put another $231,000 into a mill levy, because like Sarah says, holding that as flat as possible is better for our budget lid considerations.
Mm-hmm.
But once that went all the way down to, they took that down by like $900,000 on our transfer. So once they made that change in our numbers, it just made sense to put it here. Mm-hmm. And it's just whatever you guys want to do.
Yeah. So that's fine with me. It makes sense now.
And I don't know that we really have, the only other thing is the city hasn't set we haven't gotten their CIP formally. So I'm not sure what they're planning for 2022 for ambulance and LDCFM. I know they have a pretty large fire truck replacement. So that may be where the city's putting its emphasis, is a truck replacement, which wouldn't impact us. That would be another consideration, is once we get their CIP. And Cammie, can you just make a note that I'd love to have that when they finalize it from the city, just to make sure that we're looking ahead as to what do we think LDCFM is planning for in terms of emergency medical capital.
And commissioners, a lot of these that are highlighted, I have noted that they are for the CARES Act pool. I don't know if Sarah, you want to talk about how we would show that in the budget?
So, there's a couple different ways we can do it. If the commission, the total that we estimated, Cammie, of so far what the commissioners put in that sort of Plan B was close to 200,000.
Yeah, it's 188,500.
So I like round numbers. So if we said there was 200,000 and this reconsideration pool, depending on how things go with CARES Act and our other factors, there's a couple ways we could do it. In the past, we have literally placed that as an possible expenditure in the commissioner's budget. So it's really reflected so that you all can feel really transparent about that. We certainly, to me, that's option number one. However, knowing we have capacity beyond that if other things were to happen. As we've talked about, fund balance is in a really strong position. We have significant, contingent capital inside the facility CIP. So we have room beyond that, but we could certainly list it there under commissioners, and just that, or I could put it someplace else if you'd rather, to just sort of indicate and remind ourselves where that what those funds are for. If you look at like like back in the day, we used to do this for state funding. Remember those days, Nancy? Where we create, as you know, when we actually thought we might get money from the state, and we would create a state funding contingency line. I'm looking at page
26.
Yeah, page 26 of the commissioner's budget. We have a funding contingency line there. We had budgeted for it in 2020. I'm trying to, was that just a placeholder?
It was a placeholder for Lawrence Community Shelter while we waited for them to stabilize.
That's right. So like that would be a perfect line to sort of put that 200,000. It's, it's in a place that Cammie and I know we can keep track of in terms of if those expenses would all come back to commissioners for review and approval after we get a little farther down the road. So thoughts on that?
I sort of like the second option more than just putting it in the commissioner's line. I like sort of having I personally like the idea of having sort of a Douglas County recovery fund that if it's not covered by CARES Act, we're covering it some other way. That's my thinking around it.
I like that as well. My concern is that even though this number is calculated by our work on this budget and the requests in front of us, we didn't see requests from sectors that are surely, on the line, whether they'll qualify for, this first round of funding. So I love that we would have a contingency fund. My concern is that this wouldn't, in the worst case scenario, this wouldn't come close to what's needed. So do we want to, understanding that, find a higher number since we can afford it, or do we just know that we have flexibility within the budget to work up to a higher number if we have to?
So, and I guess I want to be clear, if we're saying a fund, so sometimes this is where accountants get a little nervous because like a fund means something different than perhaps what I think commissioners mean in terms of fund. So tell me more about what you mean there, and maybe I can think of a better name for it in terms of our general fund accounting.
Like contingency recovery dollars, or?
Well, so, and I guess that, but that could we can't use that contingency inside the contingency line inside commissioners for that? I mean, where would you want it if it wasn't in there? Because it's already says funding contingency. We could change the name of it to say COVID contingency if that's what you want. And then we would add dollars to it. So I guess I'm trying to, if you don't want it in the commissioner's budget, where would you like us to put it?
Can we switch to faces? Can we get ourselves in a meeting together? Faces. There we go. Oh, there you go.
I'm wondering if we call it. These all seem to be humans. Are they all human service related?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I'm concerned that the shelter and certain kind of obvious folks will probably get their CARES dollar. The ones who aren't as prioritized that we talked about yesterday, like arts, museums, culture, you know, even the, you know, kind of downtown or just restaurant event owners whose businesses are just hanging by a thread, who may or may not see much help, but who are key to our economy and our, you know, communities' lifeblood. So
Are we talking about right now just people that submitted supplemental requests to us and not?
well, I guess I'm
Talking about something more than that.
I guess that's the key question is, do we can limit it to this, to the folks that we have inside this budget. And I guess that is about $200,000. But if we're setting up a special way of kind of that plan B, what do we do if there's greater need out there and the CARES Act dollars don't reach far enough into, you know, important parts of our community? Do we want to have, you know, have a large enough contingency that goes beyond these supplementals? And I don't know that we have to, because we do have you know, a good bit of room in the budget to be, you know, nimble and creative where we need to be. It's just whether it would be comforting to know that those more dollars were set aside for.
And, you know, and I guess to that, you know, that is the purpose of a non-appropriated balance.
Yeah.
So it's a non-appropriated balance means it's not appropriated. Now, and we currently are sitting at about, if Cammie, if I'm reading this right, about 5.9 million in that non-appropriated balance,
Yeah.
which really only represents about 50% or a little less of our general fund. So it's not huge by a lot of standards, but it is some funds.
Yeah.
We couldn't spend all of that remotely.
No,
And
of course not.
I don't want to build expectations that there's a $5 million fund that could be spent on this, but we do have capacity inside a non-appropriated balance to make those considerations if they were to come to us at a later date. And I know that there's, and I think it is important to remember here, like there's CARES Act round 2, there's round 3, there's a variety of different programs. And I think as our nation continues to sort of respond to this, you know, my hope and assumption is that additional funds come forward and additional grant opportunities. And, you know, I think those are things that we can kind of take as we get them.
Well, so that, just hearing that again, being reminded of the flexibility of the non-allocated dollars and kind of the consciousness, the willingness there to consider those dollars in you know, as some of them potentially
I mean, they wouldn't be
future contingency dollars. I just, that's a helpful part of the conversation. So I'm more comfortable sticking with our inside the budget supplementals. If
they wouldn't be able to access those dollars until January 2021 anyways, and we have to spend CARES Act money by December, right? So I mean, yeah, so I mean the timing actually might work out better. I mean, we might need to revisit it in January and then, you know, actually set those funds up.
You know, and Cammie, I'm gonna bring in another curveball into the conversation. Commissioners will remember that we had created an economic development reserve. Remember when we used to have an ongoing line item that we would set aside for economic development projects? And if those projects were unspent, we transferred them to equipment reserve so we could create a fund balance, similar to kind of how the heritage conservation projects have gone. You know, if they were unspent funds that were allocated, we kept those in reserve. Cammie, if I'm looking at this right, we have around $381,000 in that equipment reserve that could also to me really be, that was really what you targeted that for, was economic development.
Mhm.
That could be a one-time, it's all one time, so it's like a one-time savings account that could be really accessed, and that's sitting there now.
That's
Yeah.
perfect.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a great find.
Tammy, is that, I'm right on that?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, and I think, and we have a history with that program to really treat it more like, come to us with a one-time request, and then that would be a good source for it. We've done Midland Railroad. I mean, there were some projects that were done out of that fund in the past.
How much did you say it was?
381,000.
381?
Well, Sarah, would that be, because it's an economic impact, something that we could help? I mean, the little Lecompton is struggling. Their downtown businesses, because the bus tours and everything aren't coming to the museum, so it's had an economic development or economic impact. Because we had talked yesterday about seeing what we could do when the budget was all finished, kind of give a little boost. I think, Patrick, you referred to it as a survival, kind of a survival fund for our heritage partners. Because of the economic portion of that, would that be an option to help some of these this year?
Yeah, yes, and I now, I regret not being on your heritage call, just because I know there was probably some great conversation about this, but I think the advantage here is that what I think what would work best is if those folks, see what happens as we do CARES Act round 1, they're gonna then know about CARES Act round 2, because I do think that we have some potential if these organizations work together to get some state money. And maybe it's not all of Freedom's Frontier, but maybe it's these agencies with support from Freedom's Frontier or something like that to sort of bolster it, could make strong applications to the state and our round 1 for funding. They're gonna know by third quarter, fourth quarter, whether or not they have received those funds. And then they've already got a proposal, in essence, to sort of send to you as a commission, sort of to make a request for these funds. But I think it's imperative that they work together. I think it's imperative that it's collaborative. I think it's imperative that we, like you all said yesterday, that you're helping the whole. And it's not going to look like the requests they have in your book today necessarily. It would be like a one-time stimulus dollars to sort of indicate how they could perhaps get through until visitorship and donations are back up again. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. I just would like to, what I'd like us to not get into is like off cycle, always receiving one-off requests for money, from individual organizations, because then I think sometimes commissioners lose sight of the total package. But I think in this particular situation, and with my help and Cammie's help and Jan's help, particularly with the heritage organizations, that's something we could definitely help, craft. If they don't get some of those other funds. But I think there should be a lot of energy and attention to those right now, because there's a lot of money at the state, and we have a really strong. I mean, tourism is a strong part of our economy. I think the governor's office understands that. I think they could make a really strong proposal. And it'd be great to just bring more federal dollars to our community for that work.
Well, I think that was a great find. It's comforting to know that those dollars are there and they're even appropriately kind of named already for what we might need to use them for. And then the $200,000 in the contingency, whatever you need to call it, that we can apply to our partners for the supplementals if we have to, after we know a little more. I think that's a nice start for the county's role in trying to help recovery.
Yeah, we can certainly do it that way, or we can just leave. If that would make commissioners feel a little more comfortable that we have like 200,000 in contingency allocations, and then knowing that we also have non-appropriated balances, knowing that we also have an economic development reserve, you know, that and you know, plus I could go deeper into CIP if we needed to, if it was capital. So, you know, I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, that's good.
So Cammie, you'll just move that 200,000 of that over to that line, and it just will reduce our non-appropriated balance by that much.
Yeah, so it's already been done on the worksheet that was displayed in the non-appropriated, but it will look different on the actual budget form.
Yeah.
So it is a flat mill levy. It does have all those things in it, but they're contingent on further approval.
You know, and I would say that it, yeah, I think that's a really sound approach. The only other thing I somewhat feel obligated to at least mention for conversation, because we had the presentation from the city on the internal service fund, and I'm not recommending that we include it in our budget, but I think for future issues, we're going to have to talk about how we're going to approach this. You know, the ongoing conversations about agreements is something I think we will continue to work on over the next year. You know, I would love some direction from you all as to your thoughts on this, so that I can be prepared for those conversations.
So my thoughts are, I think we need to take a look at the way we do LDCFM and study that a little bit. Is it the way that we have it split, you know, that it's merged now, the best way for Douglas County? You know, we assume that, we hear that. I'd like to hear somebody else tell us, yep, you're still doing it the right way. I think we've talked about studying that a little bit. And I think the city has said that they are interested in that kind of study as well. And so, you know, we don't charge a services fee for emergency communications, or, you know, the way we even structure the jail is different. So if we're going to start changing the way that we charge for services, you know, shared services, I think we need to change all of them that way. Otherwise, it's going to hit one of our entities harder than another one for a period of time.
I agree. I mean, I have been uncomfortable with this and very vocal about it since the beginning. You know, if we want to get down to charging dollar for dollar on everything we do, then it's going to have to go both ways. I mean, a perfect example is, you know, in the 2018 budget, the surprise when Charles came in and said, City of Lawrence said they're getting body cams, and here's the impact to our department. And I think the numbers I was sent the other day, I'll have to go back and look, but I think it was around $300,000, between $225,000 and $300,000 a year for a city department or the Lawrence Police Department. So if we're not charging them for that, we've got to look at how this works. And it's got to be, yeah. Well, Patrick, you said it better than I can, but.
And I really appreciate that, because I just don't want to get out of step with you three as to what your thoughts are on it. And I would say also, if we were to change to this methodology where we either move our budget in that direction, Or you say, well, Sarah, just keep track of all that on the side and don't change our budget. I'm going to need more staff because it's an incredibly complex way to sort of to account for things, and it's going to be hard to maintain. And so I am a little, I'm afraid it's just going to be awkward. Is my best way to sort of describe it as to how do we merge this. And then also, you know, I think there are some considerations with our budget that are a little different than the city's, in terms of, you know, we have budgets for elected officials inside our budget, and the Board of County Commissioners approves their budget. If we were to allocate out even benefits to all of the departments, all the budgets would go up by at least 30 to 40%. So, you know, that's something that an elected official is going to have to explain. And yeah, you can put an asterisk by it and say, you know, this was the year we did all that. But it's been a concern expressed to me from elected officials that, you know, they worry about it, that they try to be responsible and transparent to taxpayers as to what they're spending. And if we were to make this change, it could be used in a way that isn't fair to how they've managed their budgets. And I think all of our elected officials have just an excellent job of managing their budgets. It's really, they take it seriously and they do a great job of it. So that's another consideration the city doesn't have.
There, I can see some advantages to at least running some models. You know, we've talked about the jail operations, and, you know, because we charge that out to other municipalities, I think, you know, we don't have to have it exact, but I think it would be interesting that before we agree to this, I would like to look at some of the other services that we provide, and in the end, it may be a wash. I mean, we've do sort of, you know, on some of our, I hate to use a phrase twice in a half an hour, but back of the napkin math, you know, it may be the same. You know, we're not charging for the administrative costs of running the jail anywhere close to what that is. So before we agree to do that with LDCFM, I just want to at least get some models to say, okay, if we do this one way, what happens if we do it the other way as well? And is the city prepared for that? You know, that just has to be part of the conversation. They just do it differently. They're trying to do it differently than we budget, and it will, if we do it that way, it will have huge impacts not only on our budget but on their budget as well, and not just the city of Lawrence but also other municipalities as well.
And you're correct. And to that end, you know, so internally, I've had staff begin to kind of look at the jail rate, just because it's probably the one that's from our end the most problematic. It's probably the word I want to use. And so I've had staff look at that. And so if you wanted to, and we could talk about it, what we could do is I could bring that to you this fall, perhaps. Although the timing without a new sheriff, you know, might be problematic. So I want to take that into consideration, but sometime within the next year, and talk about, just outline those costs, and then look at some models where we throw in benefits and some of the expenses that are charged to countywide, and capital, you know, and just have a conversation about that, because, you know, we do get asked, like, what does it cost to spend a day in the jail? And I think that's a number the community has a right to know. It is not the jail rate number. And so, but I also want to just be sensitive to the fact that we've got some leadership transitions here, and I don't want anyone to think that this would be a political conversation. It's just simply the numbers behind it. I think I've been pretty clear that it's the current rate is not based off of remotely all the current costs. So if you're interested, we'll continue to work on that as a staff level and see how that goes through this second half of the year. And if that's something that we want to sort of highlight, or if you're getting questions from the public, it's something we can, I want to be ready for that conversation.
Okay, that sounds good.
I like that. And I think, when we've had a few conversations about how it impacts some of our community partners like Douglas County Extension and Burknat. I mean, that would be the same model to look at. It'd just be different, because they get different services than some of our other community partners. So.
So, it looks to me, as your administrator, that we're done. Do you, we can certainly send you a cleaned up version of the entire sheet. Cammie can definitely do that. We have time though. You're going to be meeting next week as a commission. So we wouldn't have to meet tomorrow to review that, unless you wanted to, okay. Good. All right. So I was like, and honestly, I'm saying that you put in so much work, so much time into this process, and I really, really appreciate it. And I don't want to ever take that for granted. So we could clean it up and give it to you, and then I can just make a note that next Wednesday at our commission meeting under miscellaneous, if just I'll bring it back up, and if there are questions commissioners have or want to see some changes, we still have time at that point to make any modifications so that Cammie can get published. Does that work for the group?
Okay, yeah, that works. I just want to follow up on a couple things. We had talked about placeholder for the CAC. Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, I thought we put that in our commissioner budget was where we were going to put that.
Okay, just wanted to follow up. Wow.
And I did talk to
Good job, guys.
Yeah, Jill's got a presentation scheduled for late August to have a more full, in-depth conversation with all the CAC partners. So we've already tentatively got that booked.
Sounds good.
Cammie,
Well, I
think of
go ahead.
I just want to make sure Cammie there isn't something else that we need to get done.
No, I'm good. I'll work on publication and I'll hold it until next Wednesday to make sure there's no adjustments.
So I was just going to say, and I think it's already been said, but it's worth saying again that, this pretty short, last part of the journey is largely short and relatively easy because you all did your work so well, and all the preparatory meetings helping. Sometimes I have to have things explained to me more than once, and I really appreciate the patience and the, just the foresight to make sure that we really had plenty of preparation and time with you and time to study. So it's just such a lot of work with everything else going on, but you all just did a great job. So thanks for all that support and help.
Yes, thank you.
I will try to summarize some of these findings and basically sort of update the press release that we did when the proposed budget was released. And so we have something a little bit more digestible besides this long sheet to what we were trying to accomplish. So I'll put that on my list.
Good.
Thank you all so much. I will have Robin cancel tomorrow's meeting on Zoom so the public knows that we won't be meeting tomorrow, and hope you all have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.